Hello everyone, I'm István Fazekas and today's video is about the top 5 worst chess moves. Now this video is going to be a general video mainly for the very beginners, and it is going to contain positional moves which in the 99% of the cases you should be avoiding. Now the first one is going to be a4 and of course h4 if you are black, a5 and h5. You might have seen this move in top chess players, but they are just playing this for fun. It doesn't give you any advantage, it is not a good opening, it doesn't lead to any good. Rather than playing a4 and h4, you should be playing e4 or d4, maybe if you really want to c4 or f4, trying to take the middle 4 squares. Now, the next positional mistake is going to be a little bit more complex, but it still contains the move a4 and h4. Now I have seen a ton of beginners play something like h4, e5 and rook a3. Now this move might seem good, but as you can see on the evaluation bar, it is very much bad. And it is bad for a lot of reasons. For example, we just hang our rook here, but other than that, if black played something else like d5 and played rook a3, it is still a very bad move. It can be attacked easily. The rook doesn't do anything right now. The rook is mainly good in the middle game and endgame when it has free lines and access to a lot of squares on the board. This is not something you want to be playing when you are a beginner, but even if you are an intermediate or pro, you don't want to play a rook lift as your first two moves. Now, of course, when you are leading a big attack on the other side, you can play the rook lift, but not in the beginning. Our next big mistake is going to be about our king. Now, a lot of people play this as a joke, but you shouldn't as a beginner because it is very much bad for you, and you will be losing a lot of games if you playing your king in the center. This is very bad for you. Now, you might be thinking that, oh look, my king has a lot of squares, it cannot be checkmated, but that's very wrong. The best thing you can do is to castle as quickly as you possibly can. So let's see some normal moves. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop out, pawn out, and we castle right away. Now, as you can see, the pawns are blocking our king, and it is the safest here because we can defend with the pawns and of course with the knight and the queen, and the queen is just basically safe here, far better than the middle. So what you have to avoid at all costs is playing your king, I don't know, in the middle. As you can see, this position is already losing for white for a ton of reasons. Of course, you won't get checkmated out of the blue, and you might be like, oh well, I can still beat my opponent because they are beginners as well, but that doesn't justify moving your king in the center, and also if you want to get better, you should avoid this. Our next mistake is going to be about the knights. Now, learning how to play with knights is not for beginners. This is one of the hardest things in chess to learn, but one of the reasons knights are good is because they can cover a lot of squares on the table around them. Now, what you have to avoid, and what is the mistake here, is when you play a normal game in normal moves, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop out, pawn out. So far, this is a great position. A lot of players have played this. Now, what you should avoid is playing your knight outside. So you don't want your knight on the side of the board. You see our knight right here, it is protecting our bishop, but it's not attacked. It is trying to go to b5, and it is trying to go to b1. It only has access to 3 squares. Meanwhile, had white played knight to c3, the knight would have access to a4, b5, d5, it would be guarding the e4 pawn, you can go to e2, and of course back to b1. Now, as you can see, this is a lot more moves, and unless you really have to guard this bishop with a knight, which of course there are scenarios like that, but mainly you won't have that, especially this early on in the game, you'd rather move the bishop out of danger than protect it from a3 with your knight. That is very bad, and this is a general rule that you shouldn't be playing your knights to the side of the board because they won't be protecting as many squares. Now, before we go to the next positional mistake, I would like to ask all of you to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment. For our next mistakes, I would like to talk about the queen and the bishops. Those are the two things I haven't really mentioned in this video. Now, for the queen, a lot of beginner players will try to go for the early mates and try to play something like this maybe, saying, I'm threatening checkmate, maybe my opponent won't see it and I will have an easy game. But this is something you should be avoiding, because having your queen outside this early can easily be turned over to your side. For example, you play normal moves and now your queen will be attacked, and it can be attacked a lot of ways, as you can see. Now, this is something you should be avoiding, because your queen is your second most valuable piece. Of course, the first one is the king. You should be avoiding the king at all costs. But after then, it's the queen. It is very strong, but you don't need it in the first half of the game. You don't need it in the opening, because you won't be giving checkmate to an intermediate or a better player. And having the queen outside is only a liability. With that being said, of course, once again, there are openings and tricks which contain that you should be moving your queen outside, but unless you're playing those just in a very random opening, you shouldn't put your queen outside. Now, for the next part, your bishops. What you should be doing with your bishops is you need open diagonals for them. This is why a lot of players like to play like this. This is called the dragon bishop. And as you can see, it is called a dragon because it can see all the way through. And it sees the whole diagonal, and that is great because this is, of course, one of the biggest diagonals on the chessboard, and it controls a lot of squares. Now, what you shouldn't be doing with your bishops is playing something like d3, e4, and then just your bishop is stuck in here. It cannot go anywhere. You cannot even play a dragon bishop here because it would be still stuck. So before moving those pawns, you should be thinking about your bishop. So this is why a lot of people like to play something like this. Maybe that's not the best, but if you are forgetting your bishop inside a lot of times, you can play that. Of course, you can just play normal stuff and then get your bishop out when you already know where you want to put it. And just remember one thing, never should leave your bishop inside and let it be behind your pawns. Because this bishop is very sad right here. It only has one square, and of course it's guarding this pawn, but that doesn't really matter for us right now. So this bishop is very, very bad. And meanwhile, this bishop is living its best life. Of course, the dragon bishop, once again, is very good. Just remember that even in these positions, you should be remembering that still you shouldn't block your own bishop. That's just bad. It's a bad move. Of course, once again, I have to add, it's not always bad, but most of the times it's going to be bad. Your bishop wants to move freely and see the other side. Now, the very, very last part is going to be about pawns, because those are the only pieces I have not mentioned at all. For your pawns, of course, I said a4, h4, not good starting moves. You should avoid them. But other than that, your pawn's positions. Now, a lot of people tend to go like this and get a double pawn somehow. So, for example, you're getting a double pawn over here. Doubled pawns are not always bad. They are not bad in a lot of cases. So the double pawns are something you can have on the board without freaking out, and it's not like walking your king out, which is very, very bad. Double pawns are a liability in most of the times. As you can see, white has double pawns right here, and they don't even have other pawns next to them. so they cannot be guarded by pawns at all, which is something you should be avoiding. This is, for beginners, it's a pretty bad sign, because these pawns, after the queens come off and maybe one of the rooks, these pawns can be attacked very easily and you can lose them very easily. You can see the eval bar still says 0-0, but it's not the game we want to play, because if it goes to the end game, these pawns are going to be bad. Now what you should be doing, of course, in this position, you can just guard the knight, for example, and it's going to be perfectly fine. And as you can see, taking with the bishop gives us a little advantage even. And just as a basic rule, so in other openings as well, you shouldn't let your opponent have you make double pawns. Of course, this is something else. This is not that bad. And if you are taking with the b3, you can attack in the center and say that, oh yeah, I'm still fine because I'm attacking and these pawns are helping my center attack. Yes, as I showed you, this other position where you have a pretty bad double pawn and they are standing alone, they don't have other pawns to guard them, then they become very easy targets. So you should be avoiding these doubled pawns. And at the end, let's do a quick recap of what you should be avoiding and what you should be rather doing. So avoid moves like a4, h4, a5, h5 in the beginning of your games. And also avoid the early rook lift. This is once again very bad, even worse than the simple a4. The quick rook lift is not good at all. The next one is about your knights. You shouldn't put your knights on the side of the board because they don't have that many squares to attack. You should be putting them in the middle, have them cover a lot of squares for you, and even move them in the middle as much as you can. Of course, be careful, don't let your knight be taken, but if you can put them in the middle and guard them, that's really great. For the next one, your king. You should never be walking your king in the middle like this, especially early on in the game. This is very bad for you. You can see on the evaluation bar, it's very bad. What you should be doing is putting your king into safety by castling, of course, either side for now, and play the game as it goes. I'm not saying that it's always bad, but you should be avoiding it. In the opening, you should never be walking your king outside. Next one was about your queen, and I was talking about the early queen attacks and the beginner ideas that say that, oh my god, I'm going to checkmate them in 4 moves or so, I'm going to get my queen out. You should never do that. You should be avoiding that, and of course, if you have learned an opening that says, oh yes, you should put it out, then do it, but don't go on random queen attacks because your queen is likely to be captured and smothered by other cheap pieces like knights and bishops, and you don't want to be down a queen. The next one was about your bishops. Remember that the bishops like big diagonals and they like to see through the whole board. The dragon bishop, of course, and just moving it outside is something great because it can see a whole diagonal. If you build a wall in front of it, the bishop is going to be very bad inside. This is once again just a general rule. If you are trying to be better in positional play, try not to block your bishops inside. And the last one, something that you should be looking out for, is the double pawns. Now, there was the line that I showed you which had the double pawns right here, and these double pawns are going to be a liability in the end game. If you are trying to see the flow of the game and think forward a lot, then you should avoid these double pawns because in the end game they will be a liability and it is something you should be avoiding. Thank you very much for your attention. I would like to once again ask you guys to subscribe, leave a like on the video and comment something. Thank you for your attention.
Hey, check this video out to make sure that you get more important information to bring your chess to the next level.